Hi there. I hope you had a chance to read some good things in the month of March. I want to have a casual chat about what I've read over the past month, and I've been doing a lot of reading, a lot of book prize reading, and this is going to be interesting to look at overall because some of these books are some of the best books that I've read in the past several months. And some of these books are some of the worst or most disappointing reading experiences I've had in the past several months. So a real mixed bag with this group of books. But I would love to hear in the comments below about some things that you've been reading recently, whether they were great experiences or bad experiences or maybe mixed experiences. There are some of these books which, are a bit of a mixed experience for me as well. But I'm going to get into talking about them now. And starting off with Solenoid by Mircea Cartarescu, which I began talking about at the end of my last book haul video because this is a very long novel. It's not just the page length, but it's very dense, very intricate writing that is so packed with so many ideas, and his sentences are just gorgeous. The way he constructs these really elaborate phrases and sentences that are full of so many ideas and give such a creative point of view, like both of like scientific terminology, but then also these like surprising descriptions and different ways of looking at the world. And I do think this is one of the most extraordinary novels that I've ever read. It's so fascinating, so involving, and where do I start talking about? On the surface, the plot is actually quite simple to explain. It follows a man, the narrator, who's a teacher, and who has quite a melancholy point of view. This is a very melancholy novel overall, though I found it very life-affirming as well. And though even to call it a novel isn't really strictly correct, because it's more he's keeping these notebooks about his experiences and some reflections back on his past life and his dreams. So you could almost call it a memoir, but is also kind of like an anti-memoir as well. So he's a teacher. He's not particularly invested in his profession. He actually forgets a lot of his students and even where his classroom is. He's just kind of wandering through the corridors of this school, and he has kind of an affair. He has an ex-wife, but he doesn't have any strong personal connections in his life. He experienced a big disappointment early on when he wanted to become a writer. He presented a lengthy poem at a literary evening, but then was massively disappointed when the people in the room kind of mocked him and tore his writing apart, which completely crushed him, made him decide not to write anymore. And so then he became a teacher, and he's just kind of drifting along, but it's just looking at the mundane details of his ordinary life as he's moving from his home, which is this very strange boat-shaped structure, to his school and back again. But then at the same time, this novel is very surreal and wild because he is also trying to escape the confines of ordinary existence, and there are aspects of the city that he lives in Bucharest, that there are these areas where he can almost enter into this other layer of reality, which is kind of outside of time. And so that you get a sense now of like how strange and fascinating this book is, and it's just following his thoughts. And there's a lot of sort of imagery which he returns to over and over again, looking at different aspects of his existence, and just how it does that and really goes into the minutiae of his thoughts about life is so compelling, because there's a kind of sense of humor to this, which I tried to describe before, about how he approaches this, that it's both absurd and pointless, but also it is fully the entire point of his existence. And so there's so much to say about this book, because it contains so much. I feel like I'm just scraping the surface, and I am still trying to process all of my thoughts about it and slowly try to articulate a response to it, because there is so much in this book, but it is completely epic in its sweep and its look at the meaning of existence and the nature of our reality, and the ways that he looks into this in such a sustained way is so compelling. And I was really gripped by this book, but it did take a really long time to read it. It requires a lot of concentration and patience, but it is so rewarding in that way. And I think it's a real shame that this novel, it is translated by Sean Cotter, and it's a real shame that kind of because of a technicality, it's not eligible for this year's International Booker Prize, because it's not just one of the most extraordinary novels in translation that I've read in recent years, but one of the most extraordinary books overall. And but because it was published by, I think it's called Deep Vellum Press in the United States, it wasn't brought out by a UK or Irish publisher, so that means it's not eligible for the International Booker Prize. And that is such a shame, because I started reading this novel because I thought, it might be nominated for that prize, but then I realized halfway through that, actually this book wouldn't be eligible for that. I was able to buy it because in Foils they sell some books that are published outside of this country of imports, and I was able to get a copy of it for that reason, but it's not readily available in this country, or I think in the States it's been selling out as well. But it's so amazing. It's this writer deserves to be better known and better understood. I really kicked myself. I was at a book prize ceremony recently, and there were some people there that work at Fitzcarraldo Editions, and I meant to ask them, like, have you thought about bringing out this author here, or considered it, or there might be a reason why they haven't, because it feels like this writer and his books would definitely fit in with Fitzcarraldo Editions that publish a lot of books in translation and a lot of very cerebral type of literature. But while this book is incredibly intellectual and so thoughtful, I think it is also really approachable, and I really enjoyed reading it. But though it is an endurance test in some ways, you like I said, you do really have to be patient with it. So still formulating my thoughts about it, but what an incredible book. One of the best that I've ever read. Now, the book prize ceremony that I went to recently was for the Rathbones Folio Prize, and I made a whole video about the shortlists for this year's award, because they award different categories of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, and then an overall winner from the winners from those three categories. And it was wonderful being there at the ceremony. Two of the judges of this year's award were Ali Smith and Jackie Kay, and I got a chance to have a chat with Ali Smith and give her a hug. I've known her for so many years. She is such a wonderful, inspiring person, and so it's always really lovely to see her, and it was great to hear announce the winner of the overall prize. And I don't read much poetry, but I'm glad that this prize inspired me to pick up a poetry collection. Actually, the winner of the poetry category was for a collection called Quiet, which I've not read yet, but it was wonderful to see the author collect that award. And she was giving her speech, there was a baby crying in the audience, and she gave this little side comment that that baby is the other project that I've been working on in the past couple of years. It was wonderful to see. But another book that was shortlisted for that category was England's Green by Zaffar Kunial, and this collection is so imaginative and lively and playful. It really made me want to go back to reading more poetry again, because he's looking at the natural world in this poetry, specifically in England, and looking at different parts of the countryside, but also about what it means to be a part of this country, but also outside of it. So looking at different layers of identity, but also existence, about possible existences of the life that we are living versus the life that we thought we should have. A lot of these poems are in conversation with some classic authors, from Chaucer to Shakespeare to the Brontes to Iris Murdoch. There's a really wonderful poem where at the very beginning of a poem it gives a quote from an Iris Murdoch novel, and he not only just gives a quote from that novel, but comments that this quote was underlined by his mother in her copy of that novel. And I just think that's such a wonderful personal connection to this, to these ideas, which is taken out of the novel, which has been meaningful not just to him, but to his mother. And I think it's so wonderful when we look at copies of books that were owned by our parents or other members of our family or people that we've known and loved, and seen sentences that they've underlined, and you have this moment of connection where you feel like that person that we love and care about had a special connection with this line at this moment in the book, and now we're experiencing it ourselves. And it's just one of the wonderful things about the reading experience. But yeah, these poems as well, the way that they look at language itself in this almost three-dimensional way. So he looks at certain words and finds within them words or meaning, and excavates that out of these words to give a different understanding of that terminology. It's so fascinating, really vibrant, and I just adored this collection. Next, there is a novel which sadly wasn't a very successful reading experience for me, which was Ghost Town by Kevin Chen, which I was really looking forward to because this is an award winner. It won the Taiwan Literature Award, and also the central premise of the story was one I was really interested in, and I felt like had a lot of potential and had some interesting aspects about it. So it follows a central character of a man from a small village in Taiwan who has moved to Germany, and we understand at the beginning that he was imprisoned there for a long period of time, that he had met another man there and had a relationship with him, but at some point had killed him, and then ended up in prison. But he returned to Taiwan for a festival called the Ghost Festival, and to re-meet members of his family, of his many sisters that he has. And even though he's kind of at the center of the book, this character, and there's this ongoing mystery of what happened in his relationship and why he was imprisoned, we don't actually see all that much of him throughout the novel, because the book primarily follows his sisters and his parents, some of whom are still alive and some of whom are not alive, some of whom are ghosts. And we follow their experiences and points of view on these different planes of existence. So that is a really interesting concept. But the way this novel was executed, I just felt like I wasn't able to... I felt like it was trying to do too much. There are so many different sisters. A lot of them have the very similar names, and he explains why that happened, but at the same time it made a very confusing reading experience, and that wouldn't necessarily be a problem, but I just felt like it was dealing so much with the surface level of a lot of these characters' lives that I didn't get too much of an understanding of what they were really like, or really in-depth understanding of them or their connections with each other, and that made it really frustrating. And also the central storyline of following Kim, this man at the center who's moved away and then come back. I feel like the way his storyline was handled was really confusing and not very satisfying. The way that storyline plays out, I felt like it was very clunkily handled and not very convincing. And one of the frustrating things about it was this man who's moved away and come back. He's supposed to be an award-winning writer and who's written really explicitly about gay issues and gay content, and that has scandalized some members of his family and kind of ostracized him from some of his family. But you don't actually see much gay life in this, or like a sexual detail. And it's not that I need it to be explicit, but in order to be handled in an honest way, I felt like it needs to be shown. And there's this one part where he gets together with his partner and he's like, oh, we shook the bed with our passion, but that's all it sort of says about it. And then it quickly goes on to talking about how he then has this other idea for a novel, and he starts talking about dust mites or something like that. And it just seemed really strange that in the character's writing, he was sort of known for his explicitness, but there's not much explicit in this book. And like I said, it's not need there to be this explicit detail. I don't want it to be titillating, but I just wanted to really adequately represent gay life in a way that should have felt honest, which it just didn't. And it especially bothered me because of the way it shows the sisters' lives. It does show a lot of their personal issues in explicit detail, to do with sex and also just their bodies themselves, in a way that this male character's wasn't handled. And I found that almost off-putting, because it almost felt like it was some of it was borderline misogynistic of how it was representing these different women. I felt that it just wasn't in a very sympathetic way, that it was almost kind of making them the butt of a joke rather than really trying to sympathetically explore their lives. And I don't know, maybe that's taking a bit too far, but yeah, I just found that really off-putting. So unfortunately, yeah, this book as a whole was really disappointing, though there were many promising aspects of it, and there were some interesting elements of it, of the way of looking at the afterlife versus life. But then at the same time, some of the ghost point of view, one of the ghosts literally says something how do I feel about being a ghost? I think it's great. And I was hoping for a bit more insight. What some of the most successful parts of this book I felt was when all of the siblings were together, and it shows the awkward interactions of them and how they aren't really sure how to relate to or connect with one another because they live very different lives and have been physically apart for quite a while. So I thought those scenes were good, but a lot of the rest of the book just sadly really didn't work for me. Also, I read this book because it was a choice for a physical book club that I belonged to. If I wasn't reading this for a book club, I think I would have stopped reading it part way through the book, but because I wanted to be able to fully discuss it with other members of the book club, I did finish reading it. But yeah, none of the books that I've read this month were DNFs. I didn't put any of them aside, and that is partly because they're nominated for prizes. I want to read the entire thing to see what I think about it. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily finish reading all of these books if that hadn't been the case. So now I want to get into talking about some of the books nominated for the long list for this year's Women's Prize for Fiction, and starting off with the book that I haven't talked about yet, which is The Bandit Queens by Parini Schroff. And this novel, the way this book balances humor with serious issues is so skillfully done. I found it so moving and poignant. So we follow the central character whose husband has disappeared a number of years ago, and it's very rumored amongst the local community that she has killed him. So there's a mystery surrounding what actually happened to him. But she, and this has kind of ostracized her from other members of her community, which she's kind of happy about. She's built an independent business for herself. She's living on her own, and she's kind of self-sufficient, and so she's kind of happy in that way. But she is connected with another circle of women who are all involved in this joint loan scheme, and so they have to meet periodically to discuss this. And these are women that she has quite an antagonistic relationship with. And one woman approaches her who is being abused by her husband, and she asks for her help to get rid of her husband because she's finding it so intolerable and painful staying with him. So they form this connection, and then that sets off a string of unexpected events and consequences following on from that, and how this novel builds a sense of both friendship between women, but also the points of tension between women in this community. Some of it is to do with caste and with different economic and social and religious divisions in the community, and how that causes a lot of tension between people, and specifically amongst female friendship groups. And it's so well handled. It's so I laughed a lot through so much of this book, because both in the dialogue, but also in the structure of the story itself. And it doesn't shy away from the grim subject matter of domestic abuse and also the abuse of animals. But it handles it in a way where you are able to see the lighter side of these relationships, and kind of the ridiculous of the arguments with each other, but also of their situation, the real absurdity of the way that women are treated in this community and in this larger society. It pokes a lot of fun at the men who kind of arrogantly believe that they are better than these women, but the women themselves kind of know differently. And so getting their perspective in this way through the dialogue and through their interactions, it's so lively and fun. And there's this continuous joke, or almost like joke, throughout the book, where the women are meeting together, like early on in the book, and they sort of are talking about children and motherhood, and they're like, oh yes, children are such a blessing, aren't they? And there's a general agreement about this, and it's almost like this is something that they feel pressured to say. And this phrase of like, children are such a blessing, is like repeated throughout the book, through increasingly like gritted teeth of like yeah, it's such a blessing, isn't it? and I just found that so funny, how that is handled, and to give this sense of parenting, because they do genuinely love and care about their children, but also it causes a lot of difficulty and pressure, and and children can just be awful to deal with sometimes. And so the way that this is handled throughout the story is so good. And the plot of the book takes so many twists and turns. There's lots of surprises, and I found it really gripping to read, and also a really enlivening and insightful experience. There is Cursed Bread by Sophie Mackintosh, and I've made a whole video about this book and the rest of the books that I'm going to be talking about, but I just want to go through them briefly and give a few additional thoughts and reflections on these books as time has gone on and I've thought back about reading them. So I did have a really mixed experience of this book, which gives a really in-depth view of one woman's experience, reflecting on a time in her small French village when a mass poisoning happened, and there's a whole mystery about whether this sort of poisoning, these occurrences amongst members of the village was purposefully done and inflicted upon them, or if it was a kind of accident. And the solution to that isn't really the central meaning of this story, but because it is based on a historical incident, I did feel like I wanted to know a bit more about what actually happened in this village and amongst this community. You get some brief scenes showing what actually occurs, but most of it is just, I know the story is so much in her head, so it's really about her psychology and her point of view and her really conflicted sense of and the ambiguity about whether she is a victim or a perpetrator in this story, and maybe she's both. But at the same time, I did still just want a bit more about the village life and the community. I feel like there's ways she could have shown that while still being so entrenched in this first person point of view and her reflections. So I'm still feeling quite mixed about this book, but it is a really unique voice and point of view that she gives in this novel. And Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks, another very unique, very strong first-person point of view, giving an account of a period of a woman's coming of age when she's a young woman in her 20s, going through a lot of really difficult hardship, personal hardship to do with her partner who dies in a racist attack, but also the surveillance and persecution of her community in England, and so following her life, it is a very thrilling and moving story, and but the language that is used in this book, I feel like is the strongest way that it invokes both her point of view and her culture as being part of a Black British Caribbean community. It's so moving, so well done, really gripping, and there are some aspects of the plot which I feel like didn't work as well as I hoped it would, or I felt like it could have, but at the same time, such a strong voice and point of view that that is a wonderful reading experience. Then there are a couple of books that have been listed for the International Booker Prize, and slightly less successful reading experience of The Gospel According to the New World by Maryse Conde, which did just feel like an exercise in trying to give this new story of what if Messiah had been born in the Caribbean and was mixed race, and following his experiences through his short life, which very strongly parallel the New Testament. And because she clings so closely to the text, this religious text, and trying to emulate and play upon that, it really limited my empathy and understanding of both the central character and the community and the larger message and meaning of the story. So honestly, I wasn't really sure what she was trying to say in this book, other than that central concept of trying to give of a Messiah in the modern world who is naive and hopelessly overwhelmed by the world's problems. And like beyond that, I don't feel like the story is saying all that much. So it's a real shame that this is the first book that I've read by Maryse Conde, because I would really like to read some of her previous novels. And after the video I made about this book, I got some great suggestions of previous books of hers that I should go back and read, and I do want to do that because I feel like her writing does have a good sense of humor to it. She does write in a good way, and has a unique point of view, but just this novel itself just didn't really work for me. And finishing off with a novel that I did love, The Birthday Party by Laurent Mauvignier. I think I'm pronouncing his surname right. My husband has been correcting me as I've talked about this book, and I was initially mispronouncing it. I'm sure a lot of French speakers are cringing at the way that I pronounce his name, but I think I've got it right now. Anyway, the central story taking place in a small French Hamlet and a family that are having a birthday party for the mother who is turning 40 and their artistic neighbor who is attending this party, and some unexpected guests that intrude upon it, and the building tension of this story of why these people are here, what is going on, what is happening, what is some of the hidden history that we don't understand about some of these characters, how it builds up this tension is so well done. It just continues to escalate until it like explodes, and I was completely gripped, wanting to know what actually happens in this story. And I was feeling about the characters throughout a lot of this frustration in this kind of, when you get a novel of suspense or horror and you are seeing how the characters are reacting to situations which are dire, and they have to give these instantaneous reactions, so it's understandable that they might not have the most logical reactions to it, but at the same time you're almost shouting at these characters like, no, don't do that, or no, you should do this, you should react in this way in order to protect yourself and the other people that are vulnerable around you. But they choose different actions, and the way he holds that sense of suspense as you're waiting to find out how this is all going to play out is so well done. But also I feel like there's a lot bigger meaning of this story of showing these characters' psychology and how they are so locked into their point of view and this group way of thinking amongst other characters as well, that there are certain things which they have like discussed ad nauseum and have decided that this is the way things are. And then there are other characters who are amongst a group who haven't been discussing things that they probably should have done, and how this also causes issues and problems as well. And so he handles this in this novel in such an intelligent way, showing you the psychology of these characters and their relationship with time and their sense of time, that it is really moving and profound. So I think it is an incredible novel that works on many different levels, and yeah, such a wonderful reading experience. And I'm so glad that a lot of people have been encouraged to try this book, because it is a very divisive novel in that I feel like a lot of readers will have very different reactions to it, and I've seen a lot of positive responses and a lot of very negative responses. So that's really interesting. If you have read this book or tried to read this book, I'd love to know your thoughts and feelings about it below, but that goes for all of these books that I've been discussing. Or if you're interested in reading any of these books now, I would love to hear about that in the comments below. But like I said, I'd love to hear about anything else you've been reading lately that you feel strongly about, whether it's positive or negative. I'd love to hear about that in the comments below. So thank you for watching me discuss all of these books. I hope you're reading good things and having a nice day, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.